This is Dr. Chris Robertson, and I'm going to provide an overview as a supplement to your reading with respect to data analysis for this week. The text reading focuses on understanding statistics and research. Most of you have already had biostatistics or taken biostatistics currently, so I will spare going into a lot of details with respect to that topic. However, I want you to be able to see the application of what you are learning and how it is relevant to you being able to critique articles and studies that you're looking at, as well as considerations that you will need to make decisions about as you actually structure your project next semester. So this just provides a recap in terms of considering we started talking about ethics and theory, and we went through the various components of methodology. We talked about study design. We talked about the role of study setting and sampling and recruitment, taking into consideration what your intervention is and your outcomes and how you measure both intervention in terms of how much of exposure they get to intervention and the outcomes. How are you measuring the outcomes? What tools, what instruments are you using? Last week we focused on data collection and things to take into consideration that you need to consider as you critique, and also things that you will move forward as you actually structure your project next semester. So this week is focused on data analysis. So the role of data analysis, or what you focus on when you're looking and as you begin to conceptualize your own project, is specifying how each variable is analyzed. So for your main question, primary purpose, you're looking at the relationship between the independent variable, which is your intervention, and your dependent variable or variables, which would be your outcome or outcomes. Now, keep in mind that this could be a number of variables that are typically looked at. There's analysis that can be done by age, gender, and this is typically subgroup analysis. For the most part, and you want to see this when you're looking at articles, you want to see that baseline analysis of differences in the sample. And when you get to the end of that project, you also, or the end of the study, if you're doing the critique, you want to look and see if there was subgroup analysis. There are times when the subgroup analysis, you may see differences based on age, you may see differences based on gender, you may see differences based on sex, race, ethnicity, so on and so forth. And so it's important to make sure that, one, that information has been captured, but that you're not just capturing it just to capture. You need to do something with it. And so every item that you designate as a point of data collection, you need to be doing something with that data. You should be collecting it on purpose with an intent to utilize it in some form or fashion. So when you look at data analysis and the articles, the studies, the guidelines or whatnot that you are critiquing, reviewing, continuing to revisit, you typically see two components. You will see a results section and you will see a discussion section. So results is basically straightforward statement of findings. There were 12 students. 3 were considered Hispanic, 9 were non-Hispanic. It is a very straightforward statement of the facts. This is what it was. So even with your samples, when you're looking at articles and critiquing them, you should see them describe the sample characteristics, the people who actually went through the process to see if they could be included, they were eligible, they were enrolled, they participated. You should have some information about those persons. Even as you do your critiques, there are questions related to sample, even as you do your evaluation tables and your evidence synthesis, it's important for you to note the sample because, of course, you want to make sure that it's much like your target population. So you've got the results, which provide the straightforward statement of findings. And then you also have the discussion section, which is when you take those findings and they are interpreted to see what do they mean, and you begin to put them in context. And so you will see in your articles, again, the results section and the discussion section. And this is what you should be seeing in those components. So when it comes to results of statistical analyses with regard to data analysis, you typically see the data that you've captured. It is reported in either descriptive statistics or it is analyzed using descriptive statistics or analyzed using inferential statistics. Descriptive statistics are simply describing. It is a summary statistic that allows you to organize. This is univariate analysis. You're examining the characteristics of one variable. If it's bivariate analysis, you're examining the characteristics of more than one variable. When you're doing descriptives, you do have to consider the level of measurement, and you do typically see reports of central tendency and distribution. So you may see a report of the mean, the median, the mode, and well as the frequency distribution, which is just a numerical count or number of a particular occurrence within your sample or target population. So again, you should see this in articles that you're critiquing and you need to conceptualize. So what descriptives do I want to use with the outcomes and the variables that I will be using in my DMP project? So you've also got inferential statistics. These are statistics that typically more so address your project purpose, objectives, and questions. Now, it's not to say that for DMP projects you cannot answer your question using descriptive statistics. It varies. It depends on what the question is. And even with studies and projects, you may see some things reported as descriptives. And this is where you get into understanding what the purpose of the study or the article that you're looking at is, because there are some that are purely, the purpose of the article is to describe the sample and give you differences or analysis with the baseline characteristics in the sample. That is the entire article. And that is all they intended to give. You then have to go to another article to find the actual outcomes, and perhaps another article to find the full description of the methodology. In any event, understand which statistics are being used in what manner with regard to analyzing data. You also want to look, like we said, for inferential statistics, statistics that address the project purpose, objectives, and question. Now, these statistics will identify relationships and determine group differences. This is when you start using something as straightforward and simple as a t-test. It's going to give you the differences between two groups on a particular measure. If you're looking at articles that are using pre-post, you will likely see t-tests utilized. You may also see ANOVA utilized, and this is when there are differences between more than two groups or measures taken more than once. So there may be some repeat measures that require this type of analysis. Now, there are statistical tests that can be used for prediction. Prediction is not the focus of DMP projects. You're beginning to go beyond the scope of looking at solving a problem in a population. If there are subcomponents that may be addressed to identify predictive factors, predictive variables, that's certainly understood, but that is not something that is typically undertaken as a part of a DMP project. So what I would suggest is that when you begin to further conceptualize and structure your DMP project, that you use inferential statistics for your main outcome, as well as descriptives, but also use descriptives for other outcomes or other things that you may capture or measure. And so as you critique articles, begin to look at the type of data analysis that has been performed and what types of statistics they use. And I always question, was that the appropriate test statistic to use in order to answer the question? It's very, very important. Again, speaks to study alignment. So, descriptive statistics of frequency distribution may be represented in an ungrouped fashion per se. So, in this instance, you're giving, or you will see a display of numerical values for a particular variable. In this example, you see that the scores on, it could be a survey, a test, or whatnot, are given. And it tells you that 4 people scored a 1, 6 people scored a 3, 8 people scored a 4, so on and so forth. So you get the frequency and you get the percentage. You also see the cumulative frequency and the cumulative percentage. So it is simply a frequency distribution. You're just giving the numbers of a particular variable. Then you've got frequency distributions that are considered to be grouped. So you have group values or categories for a particular variable. So here you have the number and the percentage of people based on who fell into various categories based on income. Also, with descriptive statistics, you will see the percentage. So, well, previously we talked about frequency and percent, and you can see how these are displayed in this particular table. They are together. So you've got the frequency and the percent, and same thing, they're here, ungrouped and ungrouped. However, there are other ways to visually represent this data. You don't always have to put everything in a table. So you see the pie chart, the histogram, as well as the graph. Measures of central tendency. Obviously, this goes back to your mean, your median, and your mode. And also, using these measures, you're able to report, or you will see also a report of the dispersion in terms of the various range, which is the difference between the lowest and highest value, what variance there were in terms of the spread of the values, and the standard deviation, the measure of the average deviation of a value from the mean. So now when you take into consider inferential statistics, this is when you first have to think about the level of measurements, how many groups, and if the groups were paired. So you may have an independent unpaired group. You also may have a dependent paired group. With the dependent paired group, it indicates that subjects and observation is related in some way to the selection of others. This is where you have the pre-post, are persons who may be matched based on their age, their level of illness, or what have you, versus in the independent unpaired group, subjects are selected unrelated to other subjects or unrelated to other factors, and it's random selection. This is with inferential statistics, this is where you take into consideration parametric and non-parametric testing. So keep in mind that you have to recall the assumptions that accompany the use of the various parametric and non-parametric tests. It's important, even when you're critiquing studies, to look and see what the level of measurement were. And depending on what test statistic was utilized to analyze the data, you want to make sure that if they're using parametric testing, that all assumptions for parametric testing were met. If those assumptions were not met, then that's where you, as the reader, recognize that this particular study did not have or did not make the best choice or have a sound choice with respect to how their data was analyzed. And it is likely not an article that you would refer to or that you would want to stand on as evidence for making a decision in how you manage care for a patient or how you intervene to improve outcomes in a population. And one of the things that drives the type of inferential statistic or which inferential statistic you actually end up using has to do with 4 factors. One is the research question. Are you looking for differences or are you evaluating a relationship? 2 is the level of measurement, and this is the level of measurement of the dependent variable. 3 is the number of groups or the level of the independent variable. 4 is the research design. So these are the things that when you sit and have a statistical consultation, these are the things that you should be able to answer that will help determine which statistic or statistics you're going to need to properly analyze your data to answer the question. This particular figure is in the text, and it takes you through how or the things you should consider with regards to which test statistic, is going to be most appropriate. So it talks about the nature of the research question, the level of measurement, how many groups, and the research design. So I want to also highlight that in your articles that you review and read, you will typically see, or depends on what they're looking at, but you may see the data analyzed with regards to cost analysis. You may see cost benefit analysis or cost effectiveness analysis or even cost utility analysis. And so it's important as you critique that when you see those that you understand what they're there to show. Obviously, if it's a cost benefit analysis, they're actually looking at the benefits of the intervention and the cost with respect to monetary units. Is this intervention worth continuing? Do the benefits outweigh the costs, and does it contribute to net savings? It's very important, even when you are speaking to the evidence that supports whichever intervention you may ultimately choose to implement, if you're able to speak to savings and benefits of this nature that are objective, that you also report and include that is very important. Cost effectiveness determines and compares the cost and the consequences of alternatives. So even if you have an intervention that you're looking at and it has good outcomes in the patient population, how much does it cost? And when you compare it to other interventions, is it more cost effective? And you also consider things beyond money. You may consider life years gained or its impact on disability. Cost utility analysis actually determines and compares the costs and the consequences of alternatives with regards to societal and patient preferences. So these are measured again in non-monetary healthy days, quality of life. But what's important and what is different here is that it looks at societal and patient preferences. And that's where the cost utility comes into play. You have to consider, even if something is considered to be a cost benefit, or to be determined to be beneficial based on its cost, and it may be considered cost effective, for whatever reason it may not be a preference and may not be feasible. So you've got the cost utility analysis. So again, keep these in mind, not the various types of cost analyses, not from the standpoint of I need to do this with your DNP project. If this is a part of it, that would be wonderful. Typically, it's not. However, some people do structure things so that they're able to capture at least some cost benefit. That's important for sustainability. However, it's important that when you see these in the articles that you're reading, that you understand what they are, and that you're also able to, if these were positive findings, that you're able to include that in the evidence that supports whichever intervention you may be looking to implement. So when you look at the discussion section of an article, this is where you actually see the interpretation of findings, what findings actually mean, and that is actually put in context. So this is where you're actually going to answer your PICOT question. Did you achieve the intended aims and outcomes? And so with respect to articles as you critique, you should see an answer to the question in the discussion section. Whatever they started out with as their purpose, and again, this goes back to study alignment. What was their question? What was their intervention? What were the outcomes? How were they going to collect those outcomes? How are they going to analyze those outcomes? Now, do these outcomes, the way they were analyzed, does that now answer the question? And so it's important to recognize that, because you will find studies who reach a conclusion that have nothing to do with what the question was in the beginning. And that speaks to the misalignment of the study, and again indicates that this is not good literature. And so in the discussion section, you typically see major findings discussed and what they mean and why they're important. What was significant? What was not significant? Particularly if it was significant and unexpected or non-significant and unexpected. What types of mixed findings or unexpected results occurred? And what does that mean? And again, this is where you explore what does it mean, and begin to explain these things. What is the rationale, and why is this important, and how does this relate back to the theoretical framework that was identified to explain the various constructs that were present in this particular study? Are the findings in this study similar to other studies? What are the limitations and what are the conclusions that are supported by data? What are the implications for practice? How does this change what healthcare providers should or should not do? What policies and procedures need to change with respect to health policy? What do we need to do differently, either in that department, in that organization, or if there are actually policies with respect to Medicaid or with respect to government at any level? What needs to change? And what do we need to do for future study to improve the methodology or to hone in more on something that revealed itself during the data analysis section with respect to results and discussion? Is there something that needs to be studied more? Do we need to be more selective with inclusion criteria? A number of different things that go into play with regards to implications for future study. Good articles will give you implications. And you may also see implications for education, and that would be education not only of patients and populations, because that's what sometimes people begin to think of first, but you also have to think of what does this mean for the practice environment? What types of education or CEUs or opportunities need to be provided to staff so that the care of quality is improved and we influence positive outcomes in patients? What types of education may need to be considered or incorporated into the education of students, healthcare professionals and providers? that are in school? Is there something that needs to be done differently there? And of course, patient education, but that's not the only component. So you've got to consider practice, policy, education, and again, research. And this is all a piece of data analysis. And so with the data analysis that you see in your critiques, you expect to see them extend beyond just reporting the outcomes of the t-test, reporting frequency and percent, reporting measures of central tendency. You actually want to see the interpretation and those things put into context. This concludes our video for data analysis.